I think in-person engagements will be more limited and much more intimate and meaningful, much more targeted and less blanketed. So I think coming out of this, we'll see a lot more scrutiny to drive towards value of people's time and minutes.
Welcome to the Modern Selling Podcast, where we help the entire sales community to create more sales conversations with today's modern buyer. This includes anyone from entrepreneurs and business owners to sales reps and sales leaders. Each episode, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, connect, and nurture your relationships with your buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., your host, and you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast, and I've got with me Hang Black, the head of global sales enablement with Juniper Networks. I've known Hang for quite a while, and it's been an interesting discussion that we've been having for quite some time, all around re-entering back into the market post-quarantine, post-COVID-19. And what should we as sales leaders be thinking about? How do we plan? How do we look at the world as a result of this crazy global pandemic? So with me, Hang Black. Hang, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mario. So nice to be with you here.
I'm excited that you're with me. You know, apparently you're a very, very busy woman. I think I've been trying to get you on to the show here for almost a year and a half now.
That is true. That is true. But now during COVID and during quarantine, I like to say that, I am at the same time extremely busy and extremely bored. So this is a great time to catch up on wonderful things like this.
Actually, interestingly enough, my podcast recording times have increased dramatically over the last 30 days. A lot more people are available to be able to have conversations. And it's not because of any reason that they're less busy. It's just because it's easier to be able to go back to back as opposed to running through an airport, right?
That's right.
So Hang, head of global sales enablement, Juniper Networks. Everybody knows Juniper. Large organization, large sales team. We're going to get into talking a little bit about you. But something interesting about your background that I found really interesting was you were actually a chemical engineer, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I was, and in my heart of hearts, I still am. I wanted to go into engineering because and I went into chemical because it was closest to pre-med. So talk about, having small goals. And I definitely found that I had a love of sales and marketing, and I asked my parents permission to go into finance. And my parents said, no, you're Asian, so doctor, lawyer, engineer, pick one. So I picked engineer, and I'm very glad I did because it taught me how to learn.
I love that. Doctor, lawyer, or what was it?
Or engineer.
Or engineer, because you're Asian.
That's right. That's right. And the funny, I retell this story, and my Indian friends, my Jewish friends, they all say, oh my gosh, my parents say the same thing.
Yep. I understand. Give me a little bit about your background from just a pure who is Hang. And then I've got a very special question that I want to ask you. It's very interesting detail that nobody would know about you. So take some time, talk a little bit about you.
Sure. So I've always lived in between the lines. So I grew up in the South as an immigrant family growing up in the Deep South. And then I went into a discipline that there were few women in. And then I went up through technology into engineering and spent about 10 years in there, and then 10 years in marketing, and then another 5 or so in sales. So I've kind of ran the whole gamut. I feel like it gives me a little bit more of a holistic view of the business.
Interesting. Sales enablement at multiple organizations, building a phenomenal brand name for yourself out there in the marketplace on a global thought leader. And you know what I love about you, Hang, is yes, not only are you Asian, but you're also a woman. You're a woman in sales, right? So this is pretty powerful and exciting because I haven't had enough women on the Modern Selling Podcast. And I've got to get that. I got to get my stats up. I really do.
Well, we're definitely out there. We're definitely out there. I think it was harder for people in my age group to come up the ranks, but there's more to follow, and that's part of my charter is to make sure that part of my wake is opening a lot more doors for diversity, whatever that diversity looks like, male, female, tall, short, whatever form it looks like, but to bring in more diversity of thought so that we can all succeed better together.
Yeah, well, and with the backgrounds, even such as yourself, as you described, right? Immigrant family, that's a lot of culture. That's a lot of thought. That's a lot of different type of thinking that comes to an organization that you really, really, really do want. And I know we're not, making this show here about diversity, but my perspective on diversity, right? I mean,
I do.
we literally have intentionally targeted gender, nationality, locations of where we want to hire individuals. And we've been very, very focused on that. And so I think that's something that's very important, that if we want to create a transformation internally, we do have to have, as a business leadership team, we've got to have that diversity of thought that's taking place inside of an organization.
Absolutely. And if you look at my team, it's incredibly diverse. In fact, I've actually got the reverse diversity problem. My pipeline is 2/3 diverse because people see a diverse leader and they want to follow because they believe they can provide success. So I know that pipeline is an issue, but I guarantee you the diverse population is out there. And when you bring them together, I have a musician, I have an actor, I have a sommelier, I have a pastry chef, technical, non-technical. I've got the full range on my team, and I'm proud to say I didn't look for it, but they just came to me, and they're rock stars.
I love it. So I get to my infamous question here at the beginning, which is, tell us something nobody would know about you, even if they were looking at your social profiles.
Well, that one's kind of hard because I live my life fairly transparently. So if you troll down to enough interviews and podcasts, you'll figure it out. But I'd probably say the most interesting thing is in the last couple years, I've picked up kickboxing, which has been extremely rewarding. And
Kickboxing. Okay, I didn't expect that one. Kickboxing. Hang black kickboxing?
you literally said, tell me something unexpected. Well, there you go.
There you go. Okay. So wait. Kickboxing, how long you been doing it?
Just a couple years, but I tell you something, it doesn't take a lot of time for me. And it's one of those things where the busier I get, the more disciplined I get. So I've actually started working out more over the last 2 years since I joined Juniper, partially because of some of the benefits they provide, but also just from a time management, and my brain would explode if I didn't.
Wow, interesting. So do you spar?
I don't spar anymore. I'm small enough that I will go at it with big guys and get really, really hurt. So I don't spar anymore.
Okay, I got you. All right, so kickboxing, and you're using the bags and all the other good stuff.
Using
But
the bags, I'll do mitts with the trainer, but yeah, I won't spar anymore.
oh man, I would have paid some money to see you spar.
Back
I'm
in the
like,
day.
when's your next match? Well, I'm going to that one.
Back in the day. Besides, I do enough interviews now that I need to make sure that I'm not banged up.
Exactly. Well, that would be the key. You show up to a virtual call and you got a big black eye, and people are like,
Right.
that might not look too good. Well, listen, there's a lot that's taking place in our space, and we have many, many, many organizations that have really suffered as a result of the pandemic. And everyone's looking for a way to start planning now for how to come out of this, for how to be successful on re-entry back into the market post-quarantine, post-COVID, right? And you have the responsibility and the privilege to help with that type of sales transformation that's happening both at Juniper as well as with thought leadership that you're sharing. And that's one of the topics that we're going to spend some time talking about. And I think sales leaders who are listening in right now, and sales reps as well, will find value in some of the things that you're doing and some of the things that you're focused on. And so we think about this post-quarantine, post-COVID era, or any situation that might impact the business. And I want to make sure it's very clear. Some of this planning that we're going to be talking about in terms of things that we should be thinking about re-entry, it doesn't have to be because of a pandemic. It could be a change in business, a change in customer, a change in product. It could be something big that impacts the business that you've got to be able to have the change management, the transformation that's going on. And so spend a little time talking about what sales leaders what are you doing to be able to help plan, and what should sales leaders be thinking about to plan for the, what I'd call re-entry post-quarantine, post-COVID?
During COVID, I've heard it being referenced as the new normal. And the
Yeah.
reality is it is not the new normal. It is a far swing of the pendulum before we will gravitate towards the normal, right? So living in the space of 9/11, the 3 weeks right after 9/11, that was never going to be the new normal. The new normal would land somewhere where airport restrictions were tighter. So same here, the new normal will not be that we're all at home all the time, that we're never ever going to hug again. That just won't happen. I'd like to frame it in the perspective of this is not the new normal, but also I think sales enablement and sales leaders and sales enablement in particular need to look at what's coming down the line. So before COVID even happened, I was already prepping my team for we're going to be in a more digital space. And here's why. If we look at buying and selling, we know that buying has become more complicated. Buyers are much more self-sufficient. So if you look at Gartner's latest data, customers spend 27% of their time doing their own research when they're making a buying decision. They spend 21% of their time with the rest of the buying committee. And that's why social virtual selling is really important. They only actually spend 17% of their time with vendors. And that's usually split between 3 vendors. So you split that up, you're only getting 5.5% of the customer's mind share of time when they're making a buying decision. If you're looking at sales enablement as just training, you're only addressing that 5.5% of the time. So I had already been building and looking at initiatives that were more complete than just training. And now as we look at re-entry out of COVID, the reality is we're not going to be living on Zoom for the next 15 years. I've already seen we've gotten really, really good at pivoting towards a world where we do a lot more polling during a virtual environment. We use tools like Kahoot to keep up more engagement. But the reality is, in a virtual environment, you are going to get much higher attendance, but you're not guaranteed higher engagement. Okay, so you have to have workarounds to involve the consumer of your content with engagement, and you have to build cultural awareness around that. I'm not going to be able to have the same engagement in the US that I will have in APAC or some countries in EMEA or Middle East and Africa. So I'm going to have to be able to fashion my engagement, whether it's virtual or in person, in order to meet the customers and the consumers. In this viewpoint, it would be my sales stakeholders and my partner community, how to engage them in a way that's relevant to them.
So you're saying that, look, the pendulum has swung to the far right for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But it is going to swing back, and it may not go all the way back, but it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And what we have to do as a sales leadership team is find and plan for where it swings back to. That's what you're kind of talking about. Would you agree?
Exactly. So before COVID, my team was already looking at how we use polling and how we use exercises that can be delivered both in person and virtually. So my team was already looking at that. And now, if we're skating to where the puck is, we're not planning for an only virtual environment. We don't believe this is the new normal. We believe that the new normal will be somewhere in between. We're still on the path of creating what models should we plan for that can be used either virtually or in person, that we can pivot in either direction. When do we use which tool as appropriate?
What you just talked about here is what models should we plan for? That includes an element of what will life be like afterwards? Will there be a virtual plus a field element to this? And layer on top of that is tools and technology.
Yes.
Is there anything else? If we look at this stack, right, you've got where the person's located, how you'll deliver training and facilitate skill development, and then tools and technology that will help enable not only the training, but also enable the sellers as well to deliver in this environment. What else, if I'm building my blocks, is there anything else that I should be thinking about as a sales leader or as a sales enablement leader on how to build this vision that you're talking about, the planning for the reentry?
I always think, you can deliver what you can, but then there has to be the practical application. So step one is, sure, we can deliver content, we can deliver training, whether it's on demand or in person, virtual, on paper, whatever. But at the end of the day, there has to be practical application. So how do we go back and measure not only the consumption, but the adoption, the usage? How do we go back and make sure that the sales managers are engaged and coaching to what everyone has learned? How do we measure success and continuously feed back into the system so that we can keep improving our programs?
And so I'm going to come back to measuring success because we just wrote an article on Sales Tool, how to measure the ROI of your sales tools and technologies. And I think it's something that I've used before and something that we've even talked about as well. So I want to come back to, measuring usage. So we look at measuring effectiveness, measuring usage, measuring adoption. Those are the things that you just referenced. So we look at this and we say, okay, we've got to think about where the pendulum's going to swing back for our business. Arguably so, a corporation could have been significantly impacted in a very negative way. Or on the flip side, could very significantly impacted in a positive way based upon whatever the business might be for that particular organization. But assuming that we're planning for a reentry, we have to forecast and think about where this will go, where our sellers will be. How do you do that? How are you doing that? How are you thinking about, in conjunction with the sales leadership team? Or maybe it's not. Maybe you're bringing the plans to the sales leadership team. I don't know. How do you go about planning for, all right, what will it look like on the other side?
Well, I absolutely do everything with my sales leadership team. I think one of the failures of sales enablement or entities feeding into sales is an arrogant assumption of we know better than the sales team. I guarantee you my sales leaders are closest to their salespeople. No one is closer to the salespeople than their sales leadership. My goal is to help them sell better, sell more efficiently and with less time. So I do think in where we will land, there will probably be less in person. But I don't believe there will be a world of zero contact. I know a lot of trade shows were canceled this year. My guess is that a lot will come back, but not all of them will survive because we kind of went into this trade show heyday where everyone was spinning up a new event. Does everyone have even the time to go to these events? Probably not. We just had a Juniper virtual summit that was incredibly successful. So there will be some solution in between. I think in-person engagements will be more limited and much more intimate and meaningful, much more targeted and less blanketed. So I think coming out of this, we'll see a lot more scrutiny to drive towards value of people's time and minutes.
That's really going to be driven by both customer and organization, the selling organization, if you would, right? I think to what you just said, is this a valuable use of my time? Is going to be the $1 million question of needing to be out of the field, and that you'll have to justify as a seller to leadership as well as to a buyer, quite frankly, because the buyer is going to be thinking the same thing as well. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we do have we're still pulling people out of the field. We're just doing it virtually. And the value proposition there is even more difficult because I can't lock them in a room. I can't make eye contact. I can't ensure that they're not taking calls. I can't even ensure that they're looking at us because not everyone has their screen turned on. So the argument of is virtual time more productive? Not necessarily. I think virtual time can get filled up more, but I think people will be, again, just addressing at which engagements can I have the most meaningful conversation where I can, and that's where I think we need to look at in the new normal. We have to look at the trade-off between attendance versus engagement. I would argue that all the giant trade show events, there was a lot of attendance, but the engagement was questionable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then now that we have turned to a virtual environment, a lot of our meetings are filled up. We have a lot of high attendance, but again, not guaranteed engagement. But I think we're going to get smarter in developing a combination of both. Whether it's in person or virtual, we'll get higher engagement and attendance as well, as long as we get smart about how we implement those programs.
Well, and I think sales leaders also need to see the global trends as well. So if you look at Facebook, Google, as an example, Microsoft, they all just announced that there was going to be no in-person events that they would be hosting as companies until June of 2021, right? None,
Yeah.
zero, zip, zilch. So we
Yeah.
know that we're at least a year of some of these major organizations that won't have any type of event that will leave enough time for people to be able to, kind of swing from this side and then slowly come back to this way, of which we'll find ways to continue growing the business and continue serving our customers in this environment. And to your point, we're going to start seeing the pendulum, if you're, on the far right now, to come right back to the middle. And so I think what you're saying though, Hang, is as a leader though, you're forecasting this. So all the leaders listening in right now, would you say to them, you got to sit down and you got to forecast what will the quote real new normal look like in whatever period of time, and then start developing plans around how to support that? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I sometimes describe working in sales enablement or leading sales enablement as 25% of your time is running in front of a train to stop it. Because everyone is always trying to spin up new content, spin up new programs. And I would again argue that my teams typically move pretty quickly, but the reason we do is that we take the time to sit down and thoughtfully look at where are the possibilities and where do we want to make our big bets, and we prioritize those big bets and we let everything else go by the wayside. So we're able to focus on 2 or 3 major initiatives and run hard, run fast on those.
Give me an idea. So you're in this planning phase for reentry post-COVID or post-quarantine. What are those 2 or 3 big initiatives that you're focused on as a result of your engagement with sales leadership, seeing what the needs are of the business, kind of assessing where this pendulum will swing back in the middle? Like, what are you focused on?
So 2 things, one of which you'll love, which is very much focusing on the digital world.
Yes, I love it.
Yes, which is making sure, and this is something that was necessary before COVID, but it just happens to be sometimes my job is also waiting to generate the perfect storm,
Yeah.
So I have been preparing for having a major social selling initiative, but there just wasn't enough energy, enough momentum. As soon as COVID hit, then the perfect storm was there. And so I was able to leverage that and turn up a couple programs really, really quickly, making sure that my entire sales force has a good profile, that they have the skill set to go live in this virtual world. In the meantime, I'm also looking at blurring the lines between sales and technical sales. There has been an age-old assumption that sales doesn't, builds the relationship, and technical sales comes in with the technical chops. But the truth is, great SEs understand the value prop and know how to, and they should be able to take a meeting. Anybody should be able to take that first meeting with or without their counterpart. So I'm looking at streamlining, just like we have an NPI process to release our products. And this is the product management brain in me. Just as we release our products, what is the workflow to translate into sales assets and content for both the sales side and the technical sales side? And a lot of it is actually the same, but what does that downstream workflow look like? So I'm trying to merge that thought process, and then how do we make it meaningful to our partner community all at the same time, and not just look at it on a piecemeal basis.
Okay, so that was a lot to take in. So let's take this at one at a time. The digital world, social selling initiative. First off, couldn't disagree with you. We talked over a month ago, and it was very interesting because the pendulum was starting to just move this way. And we were looking for companies that essentially who have all the inquiries, but actually had money, right? All right, who has money and wants to spend? That's the first thing we started looking at. Then all of a sudden, it swung even further. And now inquiries of the last 30 days have gone dramatically up because everybody's in this position saying, oh my God, my sellers are trying to reach out via phone. They're using email, and it's not as effective as it used to be. We're not seeing the results. I need to think differently and do something differently. What's interesting, Hang? I think I told you this stat a while ago. In 2017, I did over 220 executive meetings. In 2018, a little over 200. And in 2019, also around 200 as well. And if you look at my stats in 2017, 75% of my time was spent convincing sales leaders of this thing called the internet, that it really did exist and it was out there and we needed to leverage it. 2018, 70% of my time. 2019, 65% of my time. Take a wild guess in the last 90 days how much time I'm spending convincing sales leaders of this thing called digital and that their sellers need to be leveraging it.
Convincing? I would hope
Yeah.
not much.
It's exactly right. Zero. If you won't be a very good sales leader if you have to be convinced at this point, right? And now what we've seen is to your point earlier, I want to kind of wrap this all together. If the pendulum has swung this far, and you're right, that's not the new normal. The new normal will come back a little bit, right? Back to this middle. That's going to be the new normal. And with that in mind, that means that we as sales leadership need to be thinking through and saying, okay, we have multiple channels that we can engage with the buyer. Which one is the one that you want to engage or the buyer wants to engage with, right? And that's super critical. As you walk down, so let's take the digital world first. As you started walking down this path, what made you say, we have to develop and design and implement a digital selling initiative or social selling initiative?
Personal experience. I don't pick up my phone. In fact, I have a plethora of fake phone numbers out there that I have on my corporate directories because I know that companies will call the receptionist and try to get direct linked over to me. So it really makes my skin crawl when I look at outreach sequences and it's 3 phone calls and 5 emails, because that's just not how I would respond. Now, there are some people who do, so it needs to be very omni-channel. So using tools like coupling the skill sets behind what Vengreso teaches and tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator and Outreach, combining those together to build omni-channel communications, and then continuous learning through A/B testing and AI to figure out what channels work for what campaigns in which regions, again, with the cultural awareness. That's really important to understand, again, how do the customers consume their information?
And that makes it really hard for sellers today, because as sellers, we have to figure out, okay, Hang doesn't take a phone call, but she will engage on a social platform. But Susie, John, Billy won't take a phone call or engage on social, but will watch a video. And you can have any number of combinations. It does make our job as sellers harder. Do you think, though, sales leadership is now seeing this as, and we've been preaching omni-channel selling since we started, right? Do you think sales leadership now is seeing this? Do you think people are realizing that we got to do something and it's time to do something, especially as we start looking at how to come out of the whole post-COVID, post-quarantine?
Absolutely. I mean, and I'm even looking at personality profiling, right? This is how you, based on this person's social engagement, this is their type of personality. This is how you should engage them. Right.
Now you're going to get a bunch of prospecting calls of companies that want to sell personality assessment testing.
I know. I'm pretty hard to reach, so.
I love it.
Yeah. So I think we have to think creatively and be forward thinking as far as and the easiest way really is to think about how you buy, think about how your community buys. I think B2B is becoming much, much more like B2C. As much as we hate to admit it, even the high equipment that Juniper sells, we're just going to be much more B2C like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to call that the prosumer, the professional consumer. So you've got the B2B buyer, and you're a B2B buyer, but you buy like a B2C buyer, right? You go out and do research, you go out and pull the information, you look at all the different reviews, and now you look at it from the perspective like, how would I use this? How would I consume this? And that's where we really got to start changing our mindset around this element. And fortunate today, as I alluded to earlier, 0 conversations on trying to convince a sales leader. In fact, we recently had a sales call that we're looking at closing out a contract as well. And the sales leader reached out directly and said, we're having the best year ever in company history. And it was in this case, it was all around, they do signage, printed signage. And I said, wow, what's your primary industry? And his primary industry was printing materials for events. And I said, I'm
Mm-hmm.
confused. I'm so confused. Like, wait, what events are happening? He said, that business is totally decimated, gone, zero, zip, nothing. But we pivoted within a matter of days, and we started doing signage for healthcare industry for COVID and retail for COVID and all these things around this. And it is absolutely exploded. We've had more revenue now than we ever had in the entire company history. And then I said, well, why are you calling us? And he said, because, and this is the kicker, because now that I'm on the high, I need to plan for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very insightful conversation because we had a sales leader here who was thinking about, look, we're having this heyday and I need my sellers to be able to succeed tomorrow as well. And while the company's pivoting, I also need them to be able to digitally engage. I need to have them understand how to be able to reach their today's buyer in multiple channels and fashion. So that was pretty good. And that was very insightful. And I think that's, what you're saying as well. It was opportunity and time for the organization to say, let's go ahead and pick up and adopt social selling in this particular case. And then futures, of course, could include like video and text messaging and those types of things. But it also comes down to this. Let's touch basis on the tools and technology. And then I want to come back to the blurring the lines between sales and technical sales. So between tools and technology, I have a saying, I think you've heard before, a fool with a tool is still a fool.
That's
So
right.
is throwing more technology at the sales organization to help facilitate their job the right answer? Or is there something that has to go into the right type of tool, the right type of education, the right type of usage before deploying something?
That's a really good question. One of the first things that I'll do when I have a sales enablement engagement, and I say engagement because this is the third company that I've built an enablement organization around, but I had about 30 different engagements when I had my own consulting company. And one of the first things I'll do is I will lay the patient on the table, take a look at the entire tool stack end to end from marketing ops, demand gen to handoff into sales. And I always say, if you look at the sales tool stack, you have to make sure that you have the tools in there that are effective in sales acceleration and not band-aiding bad behavior. Because otherwise you would have a plethora of tools in there. And then are you leveraging your individual tools to their maximum, or are you Frankensteining in 30 different tools where you could probably have 3 or 4? That's really fun for a seller to have to go into 8 different tools to quote unquote log an activity, to find what they need. So evaluation of the tool stack is extremely important. That said, tools for me is like a kid in a candy store. I love them. If I could buy every single one of them, I would, but I also don't have, I also know that that's not the right thing to do for the company or for my seller. So I actually tend to go the opposite way. I tend to go for less is more and look at the tools that can give me the highest coverage across the tool stack.
And when you think about tools, I heard you mention obviously around efficiency, productivity, and or prospecting. There's many other tools that you can buy in different stages of the sales technology needs. Is there anything that you're looking at right now that you're saying, oh, this is hot, and this is something that, and I don't know if you have an answer to this one, but you could say no, but this is hot. This is a really cool thing that sales leaders should be thinking about.
I really love being able to map consumption to sales productivity. So any tool in there that helps me look at my individual reps productivity is interesting to me if I can measure it. I'm going to try to be vague and leave it at that because again, I don't want 40 vendors calling me tomorrow.
You're like, well, so you said on the podcast that you were looking for.
Exactly.
All right.
Why did you endorse us? Why didn't you endorse us?
There you go. All right. Let's go back to the other thing that you're working on. And that was, you talked about blurring the lines between sales and technical sales. Interesting that that's even a topic right now in today's world. Why? Help me understand. What is this all about, and what will it do for the organization?
Well, if you had a company like Juniper, our tech stack, our portfolio is so complete and so complex. So we've got some sellers that are going to be naturally much more technical than some of our SE generalists. And we may have some SEs that support anywhere from our SDRs into our enterprise segment, into our very complicated service provider and cloud. So we've got to be able, again, I'm all about meeting my customers and my consumers where they are. So I'm not really going to confine my collateral to this is only sales relevant. This is only SE relevant. What I'd like to do is think of it as a course catalog, right? If I am going in to get, let's say, an engineering degree, what does my core curriculum look like? What does my engineering curriculum look like on that path? However, I may be 2 years into chemical engineering and I want to move over to electrical. Then where would I cross over? So what we're trying to define is almost like a university catalog to where it's highly matrix and people can find what they need when they need it.
So is that more for cross-pollination, cross-training so that people can be moved up and around in an organization, or to get more productivity out of it, a specific individual? Or what's the rationale behind that? Or yes, to all the above?
Yes, to all of the above. We have a very complex portfolio that we need to ensure we're providing what our consumers need, but also to provide them with an interesting career path. And we find that the more curious our consumers are, then they tend to also be more productive and effective.
In this regard, this is helping to plan for the future, help your sellers and or technical sales individuals, route them throughout their career within Juniper, give them the added skill sets that they need to be able to grow and develop, and, as we mentioned earlier, to be more productive in their current role, which in theory should create more sales. Yeah?
Yeah. And, we keep it interesting. We keep it relevant. We keep it very bite-sized. So again, what I love about engineering was learning to learn and learning to solve. So I would hope that we're able to transfer that to the rest of the sales force as well.
Got it. Makes sense. Fantastic conversation. Very good insights. And to kind of bring this all together for sales leaders that are listening in, the new normal is not really the new normal. It will swing back to something that is a much more of a hybrid role, probably not to the old ways, post or pre-March of 2020. And what we need to be thinking about are several things, or include several things, and that is how to plan for reentry post-quarantine, post-COVID. And what will our new normal, your new normal look like in the future? And then start planning around that. And in Hang's case, she mentioned things about being focused on digital and teaching their sellers the right skill set for a digital world. And then also really blurring those lines between sales and technical sales and helping to drive cross-pollination, knowledge for growth inside of the organization. Love that discussion. And I love particularly your specific focus on helping your sellers to get through what I'm calling right now the current new normal. So,
That's right.
Hang, that was fabulous. Any other closing thoughts on what you wanted to help sales leaders think about, or sales enablement leaders to think about in terms of planning for re-entry?
Well, one of my favorite all-time quotes is from Seneca the Younger. You know the definition of luck?
What is it?
It's when opportunity meets preparation. And that's what reentry is, planning for reentry is all about.
And there you have it, when opportunity meets preparation. So the message is prepare now. Fabulous. Love it. So Hang, before I let you go, how can people get connected to you? Obviously, I'm sure you get a lot of calls, but if someone's truly interested in connecting with you, can they tweet at you? Can they reach out on LinkedIn? What's the best way?
The best way to reach me is definitely through LinkedIn. Send me a connection request, and yeah, we can have a conversation.
And make sure that when you reach out to Hang Black, we'll have her LinkedIn profile URL inside the show notes. But make sure when you reach out, you say, Hang, I heard you on the Modern Selling Podcast. Because if you do not, are you going to ignore that, Hang?
I will absolutely ignore it. I that is to your point. I do not really respond to requests that don't have some sort of messaging inside it. So thank you for that call out.
Personalize it. And hang one last question for you, my friend. And that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
Shawshank Redemption has to be.
Shawshank Redemption. I think that is probably the one that has been picked the most by all of our 150 plus guests on this show. So fair enough. Is there a reason why it's your all-time favorite?
It's the problem solving and the years and years of problem solving and planning for reentry. he wasn't planning for the moment. So I love that one. But I'll give you a second one just for fun that I guarantee you that no one else picks. It's just Grease 2.
Grease 2.
Not the first one, the second one.
Not the first one, but the second one. All right, I got it. Grease 2. We'll go with that one as well. Grease 2 and Shawshank Redemption. Hank, fabulous having you on the Modern Selling Podcast. Thank you, my friend, for joining me and giving away some of your thought leadership here on the podcast. Don't turn that dial yet, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to this very important message right now. And thanks for joining me on the Modern Selling Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a rating and review on iTunes. I would appreciate it. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to themodernsellingpodcast.com. Hey, since you'll be on our site, be sure to check out our Modern Marketing Engine podcast hosted by my co-founder and CMO, Bernie Borges. Thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.